Hello, today I want to look at an important aspect of the Augustan image by bringing together some of the reasons why Augustus courted the favour of the ordinary people of Rome and the ways he went about doing this. The attention he gave to this relationship in his Res Gestae and elsewhere attests to the importance of both the image and the reality of a princeps at one with his people for the stability of his new regime. Let's start with chapter 15 of the Res Gestae. This is a list of the amounts of grain or cash paid out as personal donations by Augustus. Some are to veteran soldiers, and there is more in following chapters on donations to them and on Augustus's other monetary aid when public revenues ran short. But much of chapter 15 concerns the people of Rome, and it's a series of distributions up to 2 BC. After the initial payout, which is the settlement of Julius Caesar's legacy, to which we shall return in a moment, we usually see handouts on the occasion of imperial military successes. For example, Augustus's triple triumph in 29 BC, where he used the wealth of Egypt, or his return from the Cantabrian Wars in 24 BC, which is the one mentioned as happening in his 10th consulship, or upon other imperial landmark dates. The births of the grandsons Gaius and Lucius Caesar in 5 and 2 BC, or on the occasion of his election as Pontifex Maximus, or this might perhaps be on the occasion of the legacy that came from the recently dead Agrippa, also in 12 BC. In other words, they are a means of including the people in the achievements of the new regime and of enabling its benefits to affect them directly and materially. Moreover, the donations are financed not from state funds, but from the emperor's own resources, whether it's what was left him by Caesar, or whether it's war plunder, or whether it's his own private property. The bond effected is thus a personal one, and the sums of money involved in each distribution are substantial. It's therefore worth asking ourselves why Augustus thought it worthwhile to go to such lengths to bind the loyalties of the people to himself in such a direct and personal fashion. First and foremost, the grassroots support of the Roman plebs, the goodwill of the urban populace, was crucial for political stability. They'd traditionally been courted by Republican politicians bidding for political power. Horace's dismissal of the political life, which you can see on the slide here, focuses on the freebies that were potentially vote winners. But he also points to the potential snag. The public could be unpredictable. Conscious of their retail value, the plebs were on the lookout for the highest bidder. And so we find Augustus himself quoted in Suetonius chapter 42 after the end of one grain shortage, and he says, "I was strongly inclined to do away forever with distributions of grain because through dependence upon them agriculture was neglected, but I didn't carry out my purpose feeling sure that they would one day be renewed through desire for popular favour." In other words, if he didn't secure the fickle plebs with regular handouts, someone else might, and that could constitute a potential political threat to his own position. Allied to this, of course, we must remember that the power and influence of Rome's elite families had been in part based on their protection of socially inferior supporters in a patron-client relationship. Here, as he did elsewhere in areas where the elite had an opening for self-expression, influence, power, or prestige, Augustus closed in to seal off the opening and edge out potential competition. Although elite families continued to exercise patronage, henceforth the plebs would have one patron of any significance, the emperor himself. However, to understand the strength of the bond between Augustus and the people of Rome, we should go back to a time before he was Augustus at all, and to possibly one of the most famous mass cash handouts in history. This is the first one in Augustus's own list in Res Gestae 15, where he says that, in accordance with his father's will, he paid out 300 sesterces each to the members of the Roman plebs. Julius Caesar had left the young Octavian his chief heir, and had bequeathed 300 sesterces each to the people of Rome, as well as his gardens across the Tiber as a public amenity for them, according to Suetonius in his Life of Julius Caesar, chapter 83. Now, Mark Antony tried to obstruct his potential rival to the political heritage of Caesar by refusing to hand over the money. But undaunted, Octavian went ahead and sold some of his own property to ensure a timely distribution, probably in May or June of 44 BC. And he may even have included a larger number of recipients than was originally stipulated by Caesar, thus buying the people's support. Effectively enabled him to lever the more experienced Antony to one side and install himself as Caesar's heir politically as well as by adoption. It's also worth noting that while there had been earlier examples of handouts of foodstuff at Rome, it was Caesar, above all, who had provided Augustus with the blueprint for the other money distributions as a popularity ploy, having made one such after his own quadruple triumph in 46 BC, with added grain and oil, according to Dio and Suetonius. Payouts to the people thus cemented Augustus's position as Caesar's heir in more ways than one. Not all Augustus's handouts were primarily public relations exercises celebrating significant imperial occasions. It's important to note that some were also triggered by social distress. The gift of grain, listed as occurring in 23 BC, occurred at a time of a severe grain shortage. Rome was the largest city in the Mediterranean world, with possibly over 1 million inhabitants by Augustus's time, and as such was dependent on importing food to sustain her. The basis was grain, increasingly imported from overseas, often coming as tax or rent from Sicily, Africa, and now, after the victory at Actium, from Egypt. But supply could be disrupted by war, weather, crop failure, or even the all too frequent occurrence of the Tiber flooding and damaging the corn stored in the nearby warehouses. Corn had been distributed to a set number of free adult male citizens since the late 2nd century BC, first subsidised and then from 58 BC as a free dole. This dole was more than sufficient for one person, but not quite enough for a family, so would have been supplemented by purchase. Augustus's donations in 23 offered a free supplement at a time when scarcity would have made the additional purchase expensive. Even in times of social distress, however, such actions were more than mere benevolence. Shortages could and did trigger unrest, and that could have political repercussions. Augustus had had previous experience of this already, while still in the Second Triumvirate in the 30s, in the wars against Sextus Pompeius, who had blockaded the supplies coming into Rome from Sicily. So, that was the crisis of 23 BC. In the following year, Augustus describes in chapter 5 of the Res Gestae, when talking about the powers that he did or didn't accept, how he was offered and rejected the dictatorship when the famine continued, exacerbated by floods and by plague in Italy. Both people and Senate requested it, according to Augustus himself, but if Dio 54 is to be believed, the people were the prime movers, going so far as to besiege the Senate and threaten to burn the building down round them if they didn't agree to make Augustus dictator. It's significant that he's by now seen by them as their personal champion and safeguard, their practical as well as political provider. What Augustus did agree to was the curatorship of the corn supply, and he boasts that he'd sorted things out in a matter of days. Further personal interventions to help out were necessary, and we see this in Res Gestae 18, and eventually recurrent crises led to a formal administrative system for both supply and distribution, and by the end of the reign to a prefect of equestrian rank in charge of the entire system. But stabilising the food supply stabilised the political volatility of the city populace. If we want further proof of the political capital to be gained from the image of a harmonious relationship with the people of Rome, we need only turn to one of the constitutional powers Augustus did take on. The handout made to the plebs in 12 BC is dated by the year of Augustine's tribunician power, the only instance of this on its own in a res gestae, without an added identifying consulship for the year. The topic of a handout to the people is presumably significant. He'd been granted the powers of the tribunate in 23 BC, when he'd stopped holding the consulship on a yearly basis. It gave him wide-ranging powers and was to form one of the cornerstones of imperial power, but it also allowed him to pose as the people's champion, a traditional function of the tribunate. But let's just return to that very first handout on the list for just a moment, and that is the fulfilment of Caesar's will. Soon after Octavian had given the people their legacy, he had given his full attention and a generous amount of his own cash once more, together with that of other Caesarian supporters, to another device for winning popularity at Rome, holding games. At the end of July he staged the Ludi Victoriae Caesaris, celebrating Caesar's military achievement and the ancestral goddess of the Julian house, Venus Genetrix. As a consolidation of his acceptance by the people as Caesar's heir, it probably succeeded beyond his wildest expectations when a comet made its appearance and was acclaimed by the populace as the soul of Caesar, now manifest as a god. The elder Pliny has preserved Augustus's own words in a fragment of his now otherwise lost autobiography. Augustus was quick to capitalize publicly on the popular reaction by having a star fixed to Caesar's statues, and the public propaganda, as Pliny suggests, was matched by recognition of the omen's potential value to himself. It confirmed his political destiny, of course, but the wording is striking. He interprets the celestial sign of his parents' deification as a symbol of his own birth, and he's surely referring to his rebirth, so to speak, as the son of a god, Dei, by virtue of his parents' deification, as indeed a well-known Augustan coin type makes clear. Once again, then, the people of Rome have played a significant role in the early legitimizing of Caesar's heir, this time into unique semi-divinity. Our sources show that later on, too, once he was in sole control of Rome, Augustus was well aware of the potential of games as a means of bonding with the populace, even without the intervention of fortuitous celestial phenomena. Suetonius describes Augustus's games and shows in chapters 43 to 5 of his life, following on from 2 chapters dealing with his handouts and other acts of public benefaction. Chapter 23 of the Res Gestae details the various munera, that is, gladiatorial contests, or ludi, regular games, and other shows put on by Augustus in his own name or that of others during his reign. Here, various themes emerge which show us how Augustus once again ensured that he monopolized the popularity-winning potential of such spectacles. Munera were gladiatorial contests and hadn't originally been part of the regular Roman games. Their origin had been an elite funerary ritual, and they were always rather irregular occurrences in the Republic and thus much anticipated occasions, used as ways to win political favour. Augustus was aware of this, and in 22 BC ensured no one else could steal his thunder by dazzling the plebs with lavish munera, by placing limitations on their presentation by other members of the Roman elite. They were allowed no more than 2 shows per year, no more than 120 pairs of gladiators, and permission was needed from the Senate before they could go ahead. All this according to Dio, Book 54. You've got that on your slide there. We can contrast this with the shows listed in the Res Gestae that he himself gave, in which 10,000 pairs of gladiators appeared over the course of just 8 spectacles. The regular ludi were similarly lavish, and the res gestae offers figures for the numbers of animals slaughtered in the course of the animal hunts, or venationes. This points to another area which was previously the focus of competition among the Roman political elite, but which is now effectively fenced off for the sole prerogative of the princeps, essentially by virtue this time of his extraordinary monetary resources. 26 shows saw 3,600 animals slaughtered, and Augustus specifies here Libyan beasts, that is, the animals imported from Africa, most notably lions and other big cats, a fierce, exotic and exciting presence in the arena, and considerably more expensive than the native boars or bears, to judge by the later, albeit rather fragmentary, prices on the Diocletian price edict. Republican nobles had already been trying to outplay each other in the numbers game here. And you can note, for example, the passage you have in front of you there, which is Pliny on Sulla, and then Pompey, but then Augustus, showing quantities of leopards at one go. As you can see, Augustus just pips Pompey here, but cumulatively he was well ahead of them all. The other area of competition, well illustrated by Pliny and also by Suetonius chapter 43, which is what you've got here, was novelty, a perennial source of fascination. Here we have evidence not just for hunts, but also for one-off displays specifically aimed at days when there was nothing else to amuse the populace. So a rhino, a huge snake and a tiger were all displayed for public viewing, according to Suetonius. Their uniqueness, it's been suggested, mirroring the emperor's own exceptional status. Finally, the games were not a static bestowal of largesse on a passively receptive audience. The Roman theatre and arena had always spotlighted the crucial dynamic between people and their political leaders. For the new regime, this was highly significant. Suetonius explains in detail, you've got this in front of you, how Augustus took great care over his self-presentation on such occasions, as a ruler in harmony and unity with his people, attending conscientiously and participating in their pleasures with a dignified but affable demeanour. Apologies and a substitute if he couldn't preside, no snubbing of the popular tastes in the manner of Julius Caesar, who read his correspondence during the performances. This was what was to become known as civilitas. It was the emperor's own public performance, and how well he performed was remembered. To a greater or lesser extent, Augustus's immediate successors fell short. Suetonius records the unpopularity of the lugubrious Tiberius's total non-engagement with games, the cruelties of Caligula, which terrified rather than charmed his people, and the highly enthusiastic but somewhat undignified Claudius, given to silly jokes and vulgar gesticulating. Augustus, once again, was destined to remain in a league of his own in the performance area of public relations. And you've got on the slide there the extracts from Suetonius on, some of Caligula's behaviour and also on Claudius. The popular image of Augustus was evidently carefully showcased at the games and public entertainments. The princeps became a spectacle in himself, united with, rather than isolated from his people, the benevolent, rather than the autocratic manifestation of the title of Pater Patriae, which he was to receive in 2 BC, and which we will come on to in a minute. But what about less stage-managed occasions? Suetonius offers anecdotes which suggest Augustus genuinely shared some demotic tastes. Not only did he enjoy the arena games, unlike Julius Caesar as we saw, but he was an avid boxing fan who even enjoyed watching untrained street fights in the alleyways of Rome, as you can see from the extract here. A series of anecdotes in chapters 53 to 7 of Suetonius depict him behaving very much as princeps, first among equals, with all classes, and not as an autocrat in splendid isolation. Indeed, Suetonius introduces them with a story about his rebuking the crowd when they applaud, as applicable to him, the words, O Lord and Master, when an actor speaks them in a play. These efforts not to stand on ceremony apparently earned him genuine affection. Small offerings for his welfare from men of all ranks occurred at the traditional New Year ceremonies. Even quite ordinary people are said to have wanted to contribute to the repair of the Palatine Palace after a fire. At no point, however, was there ever any doubt as to who was in charge in Augustus's dealings with the people. Where he thought it appropriate, they got what was good for them rather than what they wanted. As Suetonius puts it, he placed their welfare above popularity, and in chapter 42 he notes several occasions on which Augustus refuses to yield to popular pressure for handouts of various types, either refusing ones demanded or scaling back ones already promised when he perceives that his generosity is being imposed upon or exploited. It's in this context, as you can see, that he makes that comment quoted earlier about keeping somewhat reluctantly the custom of making grain distributions even now that the shortage crisis has passed, simply because the risk of a rival making political capital out of such handouts, if he doesn't monopolise them, is too great. Note too, incidentally, that the growers and the traders, as well as the consumers, are, he thinks, entitled to imperial equitability. Discounted wine? No way, says Augustus, when you have an excellent water supply recently improved by my son-in-law, Agrippa. And the mention of Agrippa's aqueducts is a reminder of a topic that's far too big to cover in any detail here. And that, of course, is the hugely significant sponsorship by Augustus's right-hand man and by Augustus himself of major construction projects, which not only left Rome looking the part of an imperial capital. Remember Augustus's famous statement that he found Rome a city of brick and left her a city of marble, according to Suetonius, but also provided substantial practical facilities for the welfare of her people. These included not only the new aqueducts mentioned in that Suetonius passage, but the extensive refurbishment of the entire system, according to Pliny, which is what you've got in front of you here, together with an overhaul of the great sewer of Rome, the Cloaca Maxima, famously navigated in a boat by Agrippa during his aedileship in 33 BC, again from Pliny. Some run-down areas, it seems, were also improved in terms of general environment, as Horace's reference to the notorious Esquiline area, once given over to pauper burials, suggests. One area of Rome which combined civic monumentalism and practical utility particularly strikingly in the early years of Augustus's reign was the Campus Martius, where a number of Agrippa's projects were situated, including a Pantheon, a basilica, and a new bathhouse. And the geographer Strabo noted the area's appeal as a recreational venue for the general population, and it's that passage that you have on the other side of the slide here. The princeps who called the plebs to order by dismissing complaints about expensive wine when they had a perfectly good water supply was the same princeps who laid stress on restoring order to society by reinforcing social boundaries and standards of behaviour generally. As Suetonius notes, free citizen status was to be prized, and measures were taken to control the manumission and entry of slaves into that body through legislation. But the drive for order even led to a ban on too casual dress in the vicinity of Rome's political heart, the Forum area, as the emperor issued an injunction that the formal Roman toga should always be worn there, having been shocked by the en masse sighting in public of people dressed in casual dark cloaks, or what one modern authority has termed Roman hoodies. All these stories, generosity, benevolence, authority and discipline, are leading up to the climax, the bestowal in 2 BC by universal acclaim from the entire citizen body of the title of Father of his country. The Res Gestae, chapter 35, it stresses the unanimity of the decision. The initial move, however, is, according to Suetonius, made by the common people. Both Suetonius and the Res Gestae mark out this title as a climax. In Suetonius, it's the acknowledgement of Augustus's universal popular charisma. In the Res Gestae, it's the culmination of the account of the honours bestowed on him, which started in chapter 34 and represented in many ways his most significant achievement with the Pater title in chapter 35, the crowning glory. In it was encapsulated resonances religious and historical, links back with Romulus, the state's founding figure and first father, and with the father of the gods himself, Jupiter. But it also recognised in Augustus the virtues and qualities associated with the Roman paterfamilias, not just his supreme authority over his family members, but also his affection for them and responsibility for their safety and welfare. This significance was plain to both parties. The emotional reaction of Augustus in Suetonius spoke for itself. We could end on that climactic note, but instead I think it's worth remembering ourselves that actually meeting Rome's new ruler face to face in a one-on-one situation might have been a considerably more alarming experience for the ordinary Roman in the street than viewing from the safety of a large crowd a carefully edited image presented for public consumption at the games. Here, in a passage immediately following the story of his rejection of the spontaneous acclamation of himself as Lord and Master, Augustus finds that it's this aspect of his paternal image, the authority, rather than the benevolent care, which has evidently overcome at least one would-be petitioner. His morning receptions, says Suetonius, were open to all, including even the commons, and he met the requests of those who approached him with great affability, jocosely reproving one man because he presented a petition to him with as much hesitation as he would a penny to an elephant.